Sometimes I wonder if a child's heart can truly understand the difference between an innocent dream and the beginning of a nightmare. That night, as I ran barefoot down the dark street with the taste of tears in my mouth, I learned that yes, it can. Hello, my dears. This is Grandma Susie, with my 72 years of life, speaking directly from my simple home in Bakersfield, California, where the winter winds cut to the bone and sometimes memories hurt more than the cold. Anyone who sees me today, with my white hair always tied back, my wrinkled hands preparing homemade apple pie, and my glasses hanging on a colorful chain, would never imagine what I lived through as a little girl. Before I begin this story that I've kept hidden for so many years, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments who are the most special people in your life. Also, let me know where you're watching this video from. It helps me know I'm not alone in these heavy memories that I've finally decided to share. I was born in 1953 in a Bakersfield very different from the one we know today. A city where the smell of oil fields mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee brewing in family homes, where children still played on sidewalks until sunset, and where everyone knew their neighbors by name. Our house was in the Oildale neighborhood, a modest little wooden house painted light blue, with a small front yard where my mother grew geraniums and petunias that kept the entrance colorful even on the grayest days. We were a simple family, but we never lacked the necessities. My father, Anthony, worked in the cannery, one of the largest in the city at that time. He left home when it was still dark and returned after the sun had set, always with that peculiar smell of peaches and pineapples embedded in his clothes. My mother, Irene, was a seamstress, one of those who worked miracles with scraps, transforming forgotten pieces of fabric into quilts, curtains, and even dresses for school parties. I was an only child, and in my childish mind, that was the only problem in my life. While other girls complained about brothers who pulled their braids or broke their dolls, I dreamed of having someone to share my toys with, my secrets, my life. A little brother or sister who would be my companion forever. Mom, when am I going to get a little brother? I would ask almost every day while helping hang clothes on the clothesline in the backyard. My mother always smiled in that way of hers, half sad, half hopeful. One day, my flower, when God wills it. I didn't understand why God was taking so long to will it, since I prayed every night asking for a little brother. I made childish promises too. I promised to make my bed every day, eat all the food on my plate without complaining, get only good grades at school. But months passed, and my request remained unanswered. Our routine was simple and predictable. In the morning, my father left for work after drinking the strong black coffee my mother prepared. I went to the neighborhood elementary school, where I studied diligently, always among the best in the class. In the afternoon, I returned home and helped my mother with household chores or sat next to her while she sewed, telling her stories I had learned at school or that I invented in my fertile mind. On Sundays, we went to Mass at the parish church, me in my starched dress, my father in a pressed white shirt, my mother with a colorful scarf on her head. Afterward, if the weather permitted, we would walk to the park to have ice cream or simply sit on the benches and watch the pigeons. They were peaceful days, of a modest but genuine happiness. On Saturday nights, when there was no school the next day, my father sometimes would listen to Dodgers games with me on the radio. We didn't have a television yet, a luxury for rich people, as my father said. We would sit together in the living room, the radio in the middle of the table, and he would explain the rules of baseball, the importance of each player, why the catcher could use a mitt when nobody else could. I didn't understand very well, nor was I very interested in the sport. But I loved those moments when I had my father's full attention. One day I'll take you to see the Dodgers play at their stadium, daughter, he promised, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. When you're a little older and I've saved up some money. I agreed, excited not by the game itself, but by the prospect of an adventure with my father in the big city. Los Angeles seemed so distant, so grand in my childish imagination. Almost like going to another country. At school, I was a quiet girl, but I had my friends. I especially liked Vera, a girl with blonde braids and freckles on her nose who lived 2 blocks from my house. We played together after school, making up stories with our cloth dolls, building little houses with shoeboxes, drawing imaginary families where we always included many siblings. "I envy your house," I once confessed to Vera, who had 3 older brothers. "It must be so much fun to never be alone." "Not always," she replied, wrinkling her freckled nose. "They take my things without asking, call me annoying, and the bathroom is always occupied when I need it most." But to me, all that sounded like a dream. The noise, the confusion, the certainty that, no matter what happened, you would always have someone by your side, someone of your own blood. My mother noticed early on this fixation I had on having a sibling. She tried to distract me with other things. She taught me to embroider when I was only 6 years old, let me help in the kitchen preparing the homemade bread we made every week, told me stories about when she was a girl in rural Kentucky, in a town so small it barely appeared on maps. "You know, Susie," she told me once, while braiding my hair for school, "sometimes the family God gives us isn't as big as we want, but that doesn't mean it's any less special." I understood what she meant, but deep in my childish heart, I still dreamed of a little brother. I imagined what it would be like to teach him to walk, to talk, to read his first words, what it would be like to protect him from older boys at school, to share secrets under the covers on stormy nights, to have a bond that only siblings know. Life followed its peaceful course in our blue house. The seasons passed, the scorching summers where we slept with open windows, the autumns with dry leaves that I loved to step on to hear the sound, the harsh winters with winds making the windows creak, the springs that brought flowers back to my mother's garden. It was in one of these springs, when I was 9 years old, that I began to notice changes at home. Small things at first. My father coming home earlier, with a worried expression he tried to hide with forced smiles. My mother counting coins at the kitchen table after I should have been asleep, sighing as she did the monthly accounts. "Is everything okay, Mom?" I asked one night, when I caught her crying silently over her sewing machine. "Yes, my flower," she replied, quickly wiping away her tears. "I'm just tired. The work never ends when you have a family to care for." I believed her, because children tend to believe what adults say, even when all the evidence points to the contrary. But the changes continued, now more evident. Breakfast, previously abundant with homemade bread, jelly, and sometimes even cheese, became just bread with margarine. The new dresses my mother used to make for me on special dates were replaced by hand-me-downs from my older cousins. "We need to save a little," my mother explained, when I asked why we couldn't have ice cream on Sundays after Mass anymore. "It's just for a while, until things get better." What I didn't know then, I only understood much later, was that the cannery where my father worked was in trouble. Orders had decreased, there were rumors of layoffs, and the salary that was previously paid on time now came in irregular installments, when it came at all. Even so, our family stayed united. My father, despite his growing concern, still found time to help me with my math homework, the subject I hated most. My mother, always resourceful, turned necessities into games. She taught me to make cloth dolls with scraps, to prepare soup with whatever was in the pantry, to appreciate the simple things that cost nothing. "Look how beautiful," she would say, calling me to the window when the sun was setting, painting the sky pink and orange. "Not even the richest man in the world can buy a view like that." It was on one of these nights, looking at the sky with my mother at our kitchen window, that I noticed something different about her. A special gleam in her eyes, a hand that unconsciously rested on her belly, a smile that seemed to hide a secret. "Mom?" I asked, my heart accelerating with a sudden suspicion. "You're different today." She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding if I was old enough to know. Then she knelt in front of me, took my hands in hers, and said the words I had waited to hear all my short life. "Susie, my daughter, you're going to have a little brother or sister. There's a baby growing in here." And she took my hand to her still flat belly. The joy I felt at that moment is indescribable. It was as if all the lights in the world had turned on at the same time inside my chest. I jumped, shouted, hugged my mother with all the strength my skinny little arms could gather. My dream was coming true. I would finally have my little brother. When will he be born? Is it a boy or girl? Can I choose the name? Where will he sleep? Can I help take care of him? The questions came out rapidly, without giving my mother time to answer. She laughed, moved by my enthusiasm. Calm down, my flower. The baby will only be born many months from now, and we don't know yet if it's a boy or a girl. We'll find out together, okay? That night, I couldn't sleep properly. My head was buzzing with plans for the baby. I imagined what it would be like to hold him in my arms for the first time, how I would teach him all the important things I had already learned in my 9 years of life, how I would be the best big sister in the world. I even started making a list of names I thought were pretty to suggest to my mother. The next morning, when my father sat down for coffee before leaving for work, I could barely contain my excitement. He still didn't know the news. My mother had told me first, our little women's secret. But now it was time to share with him. Dad, guess what? Mom's having a baby. I'm going to have a little brother, I exclaimed as soon as he sat at the table. The silence that followed was the first sign that not everything would be as perfect as I had imagined. My father froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. His face, normally affectionate, hardened into an expression I had never seen before. What? He asked, looking at my mother who was standing by the stove, as pale as the flour we used to make bread. It's true, Anthony, she confirmed, her voice almost a whisper. I'm pregnant, almost 2 months along. The cup returned to the table with a dry thud. How did this happen right now, Irene? Right now? I didn't understand why my father wasn't happy. In my childish mind, a baby was always a cause for joy. I didn't realize then the weight of the words, right now, nor did I understand the anguished look my mother gave me. Susie, my daughter, go brush your teeth so we can go to school, she said, trying to sound normal, but I could feel the tension in her voice. But Mom, I want to stay and talk about the baby. Now, Susie, she insisted, with a rare firmness. I don't want you to be late. I left the kitchen reluctantly, but I didn't go to the bathroom. I stayed in the hallway, hidden, trying to hear my parents' conversation. The voices were low, tense, broken words that I could barely distinguish. No money even for the 3 of us. Wasn't planned, but it happened. What are we going to do now that the cannery... Fragments that made no sense to me at the time, but that planted the first seed of worry in my previously joyful heart. I realized, even without fully understanding, that the baby who was a dream come true for me, for my father, represented a problem. A problem at a time that, apparently, was already difficult. That morning, I went to school with a confused mind, divided between the joy of finally having a brother and concern about my father's reaction. Sitting at my desk, while the teacher explained about American rivers, I daydreamed, imagining what our family would be like with the new member. In my fantasy, my father would end up accepting the idea, would be as happy as I was when the baby was born, and we would all live happily as in the stories my mother told me before bed. Little did I know that reality would be very different from my childish imagination. That morning marked not only the announcement of a new life, but also the beginning of the end of the family I knew. That the dream I had prayed so much for would transform into the nightmare that would haunt me for decades. But that, my dears, is a part of the story that I'll tell you in the next section. For now, I want you to keep the image of that 9-year-old girl, with braids and knee-high socks, dreaming of a little brother while drawing happy families in her school notebook. A girl who still believed that all dreams, when realized, bring only happiness. And you, my loves, do you remember the first moment you realized that adults don't always get happy about things that should bring joy? Tell me in the comments, okay? This grandma loves to read every little word you write. And if you liked this first part of my story, leave that loving like that warms this old lady's heart. Let's continue our conversation, because this story still has a lot to be told. The days that followed the announcement of my mother's pregnancy were like walking on thin ice. Each step taken with care, each word measured, the tension in the air so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Our blue house, once a haven of tranquility, now seemed to guard a heavy secret that no one dared to mention openly. My father continued leaving early for work, but returned later and later, the smell of peaches and pineapple replaced by another odor that only much later I identified as cheap whiskey. My mother spent more time at the sewing machine, accepting extra orders, her fingers frequently marked by small injuries where the needle escaped due to fatigue. I tried to maintain my enthusiasm for the baby, drawing cribs and strollers in my school notebook, saving colorful scraps of fabric that I found in my mother's sewing leftovers to make doll clothes that would serve as practice for my little brother's clothes. But it was hard to sustain that joy alone, without my father's support, with my mother increasingly tired and worried. It was on a Wednesday in June 1962, with the California summer already showing its teeth, that my father came home earlier than normal. The kitchen clock hadn't even struck 5 when I heard the gate creak. I ran to the window, finding it strange, and saw my father walking through the small front yard, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. "Mom, Dad's home," I warned, running to the kitchen where she was preparing dinner. She dropped the wooden spoon with which she was stirring the beans and dried her hands on her apron. Her face, already naturally pale, grew even whiter. "Anthony, but it's so early," she murmured, more to herself than to me. When my father entered the kitchen, I immediately knew that something very serious had happened. It wasn't just the unusual time, nor the defeated expression on his face. It was something in his eyes, an emptiness, an absence that I had never seen before. "It's closed," was all he said, throwing a canvas bag on the table. The cannery closed for good. My mother brought her hands to her mouth, suppressing a sob. I, standing at the kitchen door, didn't fully understand what was happening, but knew it was something terrible. "What do you mean, closed?" my mother finally managed to ask. "Exactly what I said, Irene. We arrived today to work and the gates were locked. There was a notice posted saying the company was bankrupt, that they couldn't pay the employees, that they were ceasing operations." He ran his hand through his hair, already graying at the temples, a gesture of contained despair. "We won't even receive severance. The owner fled, took what was left of the money." "My God in heaven," my mother whispered, leaning on the edge of the stove to keep from falling. "And now, Anthony? What are we going to do?" My father didn't respond. He took some personal belongings from the canvas bag, a pair of rubber boots, an empty lunchbox, a picture of me and my mother that he kept in the drawer of his desk. It seemed that each object weighed a ton in his hands. "Dad," I called softly, approaching. "What happened? Won't you work at the cannery anymore?" He looked at me as if he had forgotten I was there. For a moment, I saw a flash of the caring father I always knew in his eyes, but it was soon replaced by that frightening absence. "No, Susie, the cannery is finished. I don't have a job anymore." The word unemployment didn't mean much to me at that age. I imagined it was like school vacation, a period without obligations that would soon end. I couldn't grasp the desperation I saw in my parents' eyes. In the following days, our routine changed drastically. My father left every morning, well-dressed, portfolio under his arm, in search of a new job. He returned in the afternoon, his shirt wrinkled, his shoulders increasingly slumped, the portfolio as empty as when he had left. At night, after I went to bed, I heard the low voices of my parents in the kitchen, discussing numbers, deadlines, increasingly scarce possibilities. Our food became even simpler. The beans, previously seasoned with sausage and bacon, were now just beans with salt. The rice, which my mother liked to prepare, fluffy, delicious, as she said, was now stretched with more water to yield more. Meat appeared on the plate only on Sundays and in increasingly smaller portions. "It's just a phase," my mother assured me when I complained about the repetitive food, the bread that was no longer homemade, but the cheapest from the bakery, bought at the end of the day when it was half price. "Soon your father will find another job and we'll eat like before." But weeks turned into months, and the situation only worsened. My mother's belly began to grow, making it more difficult for her to work at the sewing machine for long hours. Back pain, swollen feet, constant fatigue. All of this reduced her ability to accept orders precisely when we most needed the extra income. The summer of 1962 was particularly harsh in Bakersfield. The hot, dry wind that sweeps down from the mountains seemed to find all the cracks in our wooden house. We slept with just a thin sheet, many of them patched. I wore socks to sleep, something I had never needed before. The kitchen stove, our main source of heat in winter, was now lit sparingly. Wood also cost money. One night, I woke up to the sound of something being broken. Frightened, I got out of bed and went to my bedroom door, opening just a crack to peek into the hallway. The kitchen light was on, and I could hear my father's voice, louder than normal. How are we going to support another child, Irene? We barely have enough to eat now. And when the baby is born? Diapers, milk, doctor? With what money? Speak quietly, Anthony. You'll wake Susie, my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. It's not the baby's fault. Of course it's not his fault. It's our fault. My fault for not being able to get a damn job. Your fault for not being more careful. Don't talk like that, please. It's our child. Another sound of something breaking made me back away. I had never heard my father talk like that, never seen him so furious. I went back to bed, wrapped myself in the sheets, and covered my ears so I wouldn't hear anymore, tears silently running down my face. The next morning, I noticed shards of a plate swept into a corner of the kitchen, waiting to be thrown away. My mother had a distant look while preparing a thin porridge for breakfast. My father had already left, apparently for another fruitless day of job hunting. Mom, I asked hesitantly, doesn't Dad like the baby? She turned to me, surprised, perhaps realizing that I had heard the argument the night before. She sat down next to me at the table and took my hands in hers. Your father is scared, my flower. Adults feel fear too, did you know? He's afraid of not being able to take care of all of us as a father should. But the baby isn't to blame, I argued, repeating what I had heard her say. No, he isn't. Nobody is to blame. It's the circumstances, Susie. Sometimes life puts us in difficult situations to test our strength. She stroked my hair. But everything will be all right. You'll see. We're a family, and families face difficulties together. I wanted to believe her. I truly wanted to believe that everything would be all right, that my father would find a job, that we would go back to being the happy family we were before, now with a new member. But fear had settled in me, like a cold shadow that followed me even on sunny days. At school, my teacher noticed the change. I, who had always been a participative student, was now quiet, distracted, sometimes with a blank notebook at the end of class. Is everything okay at home, Susie? She asked one day, calling me to talk after everyone had left. I didn't know what to answer. At home, my mother always said not to comment on our difficulties with anyone. Family problems are solved within the family was her motto. But Mrs. Olivia had kind eyes and a voice that inspired confidence. My father lost his job, I finally confessed. And my mother is going to have a baby. We have no money. She nodded, understanding. Many families are going through difficulties, Susie. The country's economic situation isn't easy. She took something from her drawer and handed it to me, a small package wrapped in brown paper. This is for you. Open it when you get home. It was a box of colored pencils with 12 different colors, much nicer than my old box of 6 pencils already worn down almost to the end. I was speechless in the face of the unexpected gift. Thank you, teacher, I murmured, holding the box against my chest. You're welcome, dear. And remember, even the darkest clouds pass. The sun always shines again. That small act of kindness brightened my day, but the situation at home continued to deteriorate. July gave way to August, August to September, and my father remained unemployed. The savings that my parents had put aside, never very substantial, were coming to an end. We started selling things. First, the radio where we listened to Dodgers games, then my mother's sewing machine, her work instrument, but which now she could barely use with her 6-month belly. The sale of the sewing machine was especially painful. It was a black Singer, one of those with an iron pedal, which had belonged to my maternal grandmother. My mother cried when the man from the pawn shop took it away, but we had no choice. The rent was late, and the landlord, previously understanding, was beginning to make threats of eviction. With the money from the machine, we paid 2 months of overdue rent and bought some food. But it was a temporary solution, like putting a Band-Aid on a deep cut that needed stitches. It was during this time that my father began to drink more seriously. Before, he would have an occasional beer with friends on weekends or a glass of wine at family parties. Now, he came home smelling of whiskey almost every day. The money that should have been for food, for rent, for basic necessities, began to be diverted to alcohol. Are you spending on whiskey what little we have? I heard my mother question him one night, her voice breaking. And what do you want me to do, Irene? He replied, his speech already slurred. Stay sober to think all the time that I'm a failure? That I can't support my own family? That I'm going to have another mouth to feed, and I don't even have enough for the daughter I already have? Drinking won't solve anything, Anthony. It will only make everything worse. It can't get worse than it is, he laughed, a bitter laugh that gave me chills. Unless you decide to have twins. My father's hostility toward the baby was becoming increasingly explicit. He avoided looking at my mother's growing belly, left the room when she mentioned anything related to the pregnancy, completely ignored when I tried to include him in my animated conversations about the future little brother. October arrived, and with it, a small hope. A friend of my father managed to get him temporary work unloading trucks at the warehouse. It wasn't nearly the skilled job he had at the cannery, and it paid much less, but it was something. At least we would have enough to eat until the end of the year. The work was hard for a man of almost 40 who had never done heavy manual labor. My father came home exhausted, with hands full of calluses, aching back. But for a few weeks it seemed that the old energy had returned. He smiled more, talked about plans for the future, even began to ask if my mother needed anything special for the baby. "Maybe things are finally improving," my mother commented one night while helping me with my homework. Her belly was now large, and the baby moved so much that sometimes we could see the outlines of a little foot or hand pressing against the stretched skin. "Your father is working. Soon it will be Christmas. Then the baby is born. Maybe 1963 will be a better year for all of us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something inside me, an intuition I didn't even know I possessed, told me that the storm had not yet passed completely, and I was right. In the first week of November, 2 months before the baby was due, my father came home earlier than normal. It wasn't like that time when the cannery closed. Now he didn't seem defeated. He seemed furious. "It's over," he announced, throwing the canvas bag on the kitchen floor. "The special shipment is finished. They don't need extra people anymore." The temporary work had ended, exactly as the name suggested. We were back to square one, with the difference that now the baby's birth was even closer. Summer had given way to a hot and stuffy fall that made my mother's pregnancy even more uncomfortable, and our financial reserves were completely exhausted. That night, my father didn't return home after dinner. He left saying he was going to look for his friends, see if anyone knew of any work. My mother said nothing, just stood looking out the window as he walked away down the poorly lit street. "Will he come back, Mom?" I asked, worried about the expression on her face. "Yes, my flower. Your father just needs some time to think." She tried to smile but couldn't. "Let's take advantage to do something fun, just the two of us. How about helping me choose names for the baby?" We spent the night making lists of names. Daniel or Matthew, if it was a boy, Anna or Louise, if it was a girl. We drew how we imagined the baby's little face would be, talked about how I would be the best big sister in the world. For a few hours, we managed to forget our worries, living in that world of expectations and dreams that only a new life can create. My father returned late. Very late. I was already in bed, but couldn't sleep. I heard the front door open with difficulty. Heavy and uncertain footsteps in the hallway. The sound of something falling, probably himself, stumbling over his own feet. Then, voices. My mother's, low, controlled, probably trying not to wake me. His, loud, slurred, without the same care. "Can't continue like this, Anthony. Think of Susie. Think of the baby. The baby, the baby, always the damn baby. You don't talk about anything else." The tone of the discussion kept rising. Words I had never heard my father say. Accusations, recriminations. My mother's voice, increasingly distressed, trying to calm him, trying to make him lower his tone. Then, the sound that would change everything, the unmistakable noise of a slap, followed by my mother's muffled scream. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing. I ran to the bedroom door, opened a crack, looked into the hallway. The kitchen light was on, projecting elongated shadows on the walls. What I saw next would be forever etched in my memory, like a scar that never completely disappears. My father, that man who had once been gentle and loving, now transformed by alcohol and despair, raising his hand against my mother, 7 months pregnant. "We should never have had this baby," he shouted beside himself. "It's a burden we can't carry." My mother fallen on the kitchen floor, one hand on her face where she had been slapped. the other instinctively protecting her belly. Please, Anthony, think about what you're saying. I'm tired of thinking, tired of worrying. If it weren't for this child, we could start over, go to Los Angeles, to New York, anywhere I could find work. The baby isn't to blame. The baby shouldn't even exist. And then, the unthinkable. My father, seized by a blind fury I had never witnessed before, kicked my mother. Not once, but several times. On the leg, on the thigh, and finally on the belly that carried my long dreamed-of little brother. My mother's scream of pain chilled me to the bone. It was a sound that didn't seem human, a primordial cry of pain and fear that echoed through the silent house. I didn't think twice. I fully opened my bedroom door and ran to the kitchen, throwing myself between my father and my mother. "Stop, Dad! You'll hurt the baby!" For a moment, he seemed confused, as if he didn't recognize me. His eyes, bloodshot and cloudy, focused on my face, and for an instant I saw a flash of recognition, perhaps even shame. But it was soon replaced by that blind rage again. "Get out of the way, Susie! This isn't a child's business!" "No!" I shouted, clinging to my mother's legs, forming a human barrier with my small body. "I won't let you hurt Mom and my little brother." He hesitated, his hand raised in the air. For a terrible moment, I thought he was going to hit me too. But something in that scene, his 9-year-old daughter desperately protecting her fallen mother, seemed to penetrate the alcoholic fog that obscured his mind. He slowly lowered his hand, took a step back, looked at his own hands, as if they belonged to someone else. Then, without saying anything more, he turned and left the kitchen, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway, the front door slamming shut behind him. I stayed there, hugging my mother, feeling her body tremble against mine. Only then did I notice the blood, a dark trickle running down between her legs, staining the kitchen floor. "Mom," I whispered, panic growing inside me. "Mom, you're bleeding." She looked down, saw the blood, and her face, already pale from pain, turned completely white. "My baby," she moaned, her hands clutching her belly. "My baby." I had never felt so powerless, so scared. But I knew I needed to do something, that my mother and my little brother needed help immediately. "I'm going to get help, Mom," I promised, getting up with difficulty. "Don't move, I'll get someone." I ran out of the house like I had never run before, barefoot in my nightgown, not caring about the cold of the night or the curious looks of the few people still on the street at that hour. I ran until I lost my breath, until I felt my chest burn, until tears completely blurred my vision. I was running toward the nearest police station, the only place my panicked mind could think of where I would find help at this time of night. I ran as if my own life depended on it, and in a way it did. Because on that terrible November night in 1962, it wasn't just the fate of my little brother that was at stake, but the future of our entire family. What happened when I reached the police station, how the officers reacted to seeing a 9-year-old girl in panic, and what we found when we returned home, that, my dears, is part of the darkest chapter of my life, a story I've carried like an invisible scar for more than 60 years. I ran down the dark street with my heart almost coming out of my mouth, my bare feet hurt by stones and pieces of glass that I didn't even feel. Fear propelled me like an invisible motor. Fear of losing my mother. Fear of losing the little brother who hadn't even come into the world yet. Fear of what my father might do if he returned before I got help. The police station was 8 blocks from our house in downtown Bakersfield. At that time, it wasn't an imposing building like they are today, but an old, adapted house with a faded sign and a single patrol car parked in front. The yellowish light coming out the windows was the most comforting thing I saw on that terrible night. I stumbled in, breathless, tears mixed with sweat on my face. 2 men were inside. One of them, younger, in uniform, sitting behind an old desk, filling out some paper. The other, older, with a graying mustache and deep eye bags, was standing next to a metal file cabinet. When they saw me, a 9-year-old girl in a nightgown, barefoot, with her face contorted in terror, they froze for a moment. "My mother," I managed to say between desperate sobs. "My father hit her. She's pregnant. There's blood." The older police officer reacted first. He didn't ask questions, didn't waste time with formalities. He simply took his cap, put it on his head, and came to me. "Where do you live, little girl?" I gave the address between broken sobs, trying to explain at the same time what had happened, the words tumbling out of my mouth. "Calm down," he said, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. "We're going to get your mother. George, call an ambulance and have them meet us there." The younger officer picked up the phone and started dialing, while the other led me outside, toward the patrol car. He opened the door for me and helped me climb into the front seat. I had never ridden in a police car before. Under other circumstances, I would have been fascinated. At that moment, I could only think about getting back home as quickly as possible. The journey that had seemed endless when I came running was covered in minutes in the patrol car. The deserted streets of Bakersfield passed like a blur through the windows, the lights of the posts creating strange patterns of light and shadow inside the car. "What's your name, girl?" asked the officer while driving faster than allowed. "Susie," I replied, my voice still shaking. "And your mother's?" "Irene." "Does your father have any weapons at home, Susie?" The question caught me by surprise. I had never thought about it. "No, I don't think so." "When he hits your mother, does he use anything? Belt, stick, piece of wood?" He had never hit her before," I murmured, realizing at that moment that it was true. As difficult as things had gotten in recent months, as much as the drink had changed my father, that night represented a line he had never crossed before. "It was just today. He's very angry because of the baby." The officer nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "I understand. And was he still there when you left?" "No. He left after—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The image of blood running down my mother's legs came back with full force. "It's okay, girl. We're almost there." And we were. I recognized our street, our blue house with the small front garden. The front door was ajar, exactly as I had left it in my desperate flight. The kitchen light was still on, a yellow beacon in the dark night. The officer stopped the patrol car in front of the house and turned to me. "Stay here inside, Susie. I'll see how your mother is." "But I want to go with you," I protested, already with my hand on the handle. "It's better you stay in the car." "I promise I'll come get you as soon as it's safe." Reluctantly, I obeyed. Through the car window, I watched the officer cautiously approach the half-open door, his hand on his gun holster, ready for any situation. He disappeared inside the house, and the seconds that followed were the longest of my life. Then suddenly, he reappeared at the door, urgently waving. Not at me, but at someone I couldn't see from my position. Only then did I notice that an ambulance had arrived. I hadn't even heard the siren, so focused was I on our house, so immersed in my own fear. 2 men in white descended running from the ambulance, carrying a stretcher. They entered the house and minutes later reappeared carrying my mother. Even at a distance, I could see how pale she was, almost transparent under the weak light of the street posts. Her nightgown, once white, was stained dark red on the lower part. I couldn't stay in the car anymore. I opened the door and ran toward the stretcher, ignoring the officer's warning. "Mom!" I shouted, trying to reach her. One of the men in white stopped me, holding my shoulders firmly, but not with brutality. "Calm down, little one. Your mother needs to go to the hospital now. She lost a lot of blood." "My little brother," I sobbed, looking at my mother's belly. "The baby." The man exchanged a look with his colleague, a look that even at 9 years old I perfectly understood. It was the kind of look adults exchange when they have bad news they don't know how to give to a child. "We'll do everything we can," was what he said. But his voice didn't carry much hope. They put my mother in the ambulance. I wanted to go with her. I begged to go, but the older officer held me back. "You can't go in the ambulance, Susie, but I'll take you to the hospital right after. First, I need to know where your father is." "I don't know," I replied, watching the ambulance drive away, taking my mother. "He left after he hit her. Let's go inside and get some clothes for you. You can't stay just in a nightgown." We entered the silent house. The kitchen still showed signs of the recent violence. An overturned chair, a dark stain on the wooden floor, the cloth my mother used to clean the dishes soaked with blood. The officer led me to my room. "Get a change of clothes and anything your mother might need in the hospital. I'll take a look around the house to make sure your father hasn't returned." I changed the nightgown for a simple dress, put a coat over it because the night was cold, and put on my only pair of shoes. I didn't know what my mother might need in the hospital, so I took her hairbrush, the small bottle of perfume she used only on special occasions, and the wedding ring she had left on the bathroom sink before washing dishes, and which now seemed a bitter symbol of a broken promise. When I returned to the living room, the officer was on the phone, speaking in a low voice. He hung up as soon as he saw me. "Ready? Let's go to the hospital." On the way, I tried to ask about my mother, about the baby, but the officer had few answers. He said only that the doctors would do everything possible, that my mother was in good hands, that I needed to be strong. Mercy Hospital was the main one in Bakersfield at that time. A large, old building with wide corridors and a peculiar smell of disinfectant that I never forgot. When we arrived, the officer spoke with the receptionist, showed his badge, and soon we were led to a restricted area. A doctor came to meet us. A middle-aged man, gray hair at the temples, tired eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He spoke first with the officer in a low voice, occasionally glancing in my direction. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught words like hemorrhage, serious, and emergency. Finally, the doctor knelt down to speak to me, trying to use words that a child could understand. "Susie, your mother is very hurt inside. We're doing surgery to try to help her. You'll need to wait here with Sergeant Oliver, okay?" "And the baby?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing. "My little brother?" The doctor hesitated, looked at the officer as if seeking help, then turned back to face me. "The baby. We couldn't save him, Susie. I'm sorry." The world seemed to crumble around me. My little brother, the one I had dreamed of so much, for whom I had prayed every night, was dead. Dead before he was even born, before I could hold him in my arms, before I could teach him all the things an older sister should teach. I don't remember crying at that moment. It was as if the pain was too great for tears, as if it had dried something inside me. I sat down in a hard chair in the hospital corridor, my hands in my lap, staring at the wall in front of me without really seeing it. Sergeant Oliver, now I knew his name, sat down beside me. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stayed there, a solid and comforting presence in the midst of the chaos my life had become. "My father killed my little brother," I finally managed to say, the words coming out like sharp stones from my throat. The sergeant didn't try to contradict, didn't offer those cliches adults usually use to protect children from the harsh truth. He just nodded gravely. "He'll pay for it, Susie. I promise you." I don't know how long we stayed there, sitting in that frighteningly white and aseptic corridor. Minutes or hours, it wouldn't make a difference. Time had lost meaning. At some point I fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional turmoil, by the desperate run, by the terror of that endless night. I woke up with Sergeant Oliver gently shaking my shoulder. The sun was already rising, golden rays coming through the high windows of the hospital, creating patterns on the tile floor. "The doctor wants to talk to us," he said, his face serious but not somber. "Your mother is out of surgery." The same doctor as before met us in a small waiting room. He seemed even more tired, as if he had aged years in a single night. "We managed to stop the hemorrhage," he explained, speaking more to me than to the sergeant now. "Your mother lost a lot of blood, but she's a strong woman. She'll survive." "Can I see her?" I asked, the first spark of hope lighting in the midst of darkness. "She's still under the effect of anesthesia, but you can see her for a few minutes. Just don't try to wake her. She needs to rest." We followed the doctor down a corridor, then another, to an area with several beds separated by curtains. My mother was in the last one, near the window. When I saw her, I had to hold back a sob. She was so pale, so fragile, connected to tubes and machines that beeped rhythmically. Her belly, once round and full of life, was now smaller, covered by a large white dressing. I approached cautiously, afraid of hurting her even more just by looking. I took her hand, cold but still alive. I wanted to say so many things, apologize for not being able to protect her and the baby, promise that we would be okay somehow. But the words got stuck in my throat. 5 minutes, the doctor warned, leaving us alone. I don't know if my mother could hear me in that state, but I spoke anyway, in whispers interspersed with sobs that finally came. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry about the baby. But you're going to get better. You'll see. We're going to be okay." When the doctor returned to get us, I reluctantly let go of my mother's hand and followed him back to the corridor, where Sergeant Oliver was waiting. "And now?" I asked, the practical reality beginning to impose itself. I couldn't return home alone. I had no other relatives in Bakersfield. And my father was now a dangerous stranger, someone I feared more than the dark, than thunder, than all the things that scare children. "Now we're going to the police station," the sergeant replied. "We need to officially record what happened, and then we'll find a safe place for you to stay until your mother recovers." At the police station, something happened that still moves me when I remember. The clerk, a middle-aged woman called Mrs. Jurema, took pity on my situation. While the officers did the paperwork, she took me to a small back room, gave me hot chocolate and bread with butter, combed my disheveled hair, and found clean socks for my feet, sore from running barefoot so much. "You were very brave, girl," she said, putting medicine that stung on the wounds on my feet. "You saved your mother's life." I didn't feel brave. I felt small, powerless, shattered, but her words planted a little seed of strength in me, a little seed that would take years to fully germinate. Sergeant Oliver entered the small room with news. "We found your father, Susie. He was in a bar near the warehouse, too drunk to even stand up." "Is he going to jail?" I asked, a confused mixture of fear and relief stirring inside me. "Yes, he'll answer for attempted murder. He won't be able to hurt you or your mother again." I should have been relieved, and part of me was. But another part, the part that still remembered the caring father who explained the rules of baseball to me, who promised to take me to see the Dodgers play, felt a sharp and deep pain. Because at that moment I understood that I had lost not only my little brother, who never got to be born, but also my father. The man who would be taken to prison was no longer the father I knew and loved. He was a stranger created by drink, by despair, by anger. "As for your immediate situation," continued the sergeant, "Mrs. Jurema has offered to take you into her home until your mother is discharged from the hospital. She lives near here, has a daughter a little older than you. It would be for a short time, a week or two at most." I looked at Mrs. Jurema, who smiled gently at me. She wasn't a complete stranger after her kindnesses. But still, the idea of going to the home of someone I barely knew scared me. On the other hand, what were the alternatives? A shelter for minors? Staying alone at the police station? "Can I visit my mother in the hospital?" I asked, this being my biggest concern. "Every day," guaranteed Mrs. Jurema. "I'll take you myself." And so it was decided. I went to Mrs. Jurema's modest but welcoming home, met her daughter Teresa, who was 12 years old, and lent me clothes and books to read, and adapted to a temporary routine that included daily visits to the hospital. Each day, my mother seemed a little better, a little stronger, although the sadness in her eyes was a bottomless abyss. A week after the incident, she was recovered enough to talk about the future. "We can't go back to that house, Susie," she said, holding my hands in hers. We were alone in the hospital room, the afternoon sun coming through the window, illuminating her still pale but determined face. "There are too many bad memories there now." "Where will we go then?" I asked, the fear of the unknown mixing with the hope of a new beginning. "I have a cousin in Los Angeles. I wrote to her telling her what happened. She said we can stay with her until we get established. It's a big city with more opportunities. We can start over there." Los Angeles, the city my father had always promised to take me to see the Dodgers play. Now we would live there, but without him. Life had a cruel irony sometimes. "When do we go?" "As soon as I'm discharged. Maybe next week. Sergeant Oliver offered to go to our house and get our things." She hesitated, a shadow passing over her face. "Is there anything special you want him to bring? Any toy? Book?" I thought of my small room in the blue house, of the few possessions I had, of the drawings I had made for the baby who would never arrive. None of that mattered anymore. "Just the photo album," I replied. "The one with the pictures from when I was little." She nodded, understanding. We weren't just leaving a house behind. We were leaving an entire life, but we would take the memories of the good times before everything fell apart. "It will be a new beginning for both of us, my flower," she said, caressing my face. "It won't be easy at first, but we'll manage. We have each other." On the day my mother was discharged from the hospital, Sergeant Oliver came to pick us up in his personal vehicle. In the back seat were 2 suitcases with our clothes and personal items, including the photo album I had asked for. "Your husband's trial will be in a few months," he explained to my mother as he drove toward the bus station. I'll need your address in Los Angeles to keep you informed. Thank you for everything, Sergeant, my mother replied, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know what would have happened if Susie hadn't been so brave that night. The sergeant looked at me in the rearview mirror, a sad smile on his lips. You have a very special daughter, Mrs. Irene. Take good care of her. At the bus station, he insisted on buying our tickets with his own money, ignoring my mother's protests. Consider it a farewell gift, he said, handing over the tickets for the 2 o'clock bus. And an investment in Susie's future. I'm sure she'll do important things in life. We said goodbye right there at the boarding platform. Sergeant Oliver, that man who had entered our lives on the worst possible night and who had become a sort of protective angel, gave us an awkward but sincere hug. If you need anything, you know where to find me, were his last words. When the bus started moving, I looked out the window at the city we were leaving behind. Bakersfield, with its streets, its old houses, its famous oil fields. The city where I was born, where I lived my childhood, where I dreamed of a little brother I would never know. The city that I now associated with pain, loss, and betrayal. Beside me, my mother was also looking out the window, silent tears running down her face, marked by the recent suffering. I took her hand in mine, in a reversal of roles. Now it was I who was trying to comfort her. Everything will be all right, Mom, I whispered, hoping to believe my own words. We'll be okay. The bus accelerated, leaving Bakersfield further and further behind, taking us toward Los Angeles, toward the unknown, toward a future that at that moment seemed frightening, but that would eventually bring us, if not complete happiness, at least the peace we so badly needed. On that 4-hour journey on the highway, while my mother dozed beside me, exhausted by the still incomplete recovery, I made a silent promise to the little brother I never knew, that I would live for him too, that I would find joy for him too, that I wouldn't let his brief existence have been in vain. And so began the most difficult chapter of my life, the struggle to rebuild from scratch, to heal wounds that seemed unhealable, to find a path amid the ruins of what was once a happy family. Los Angeles welcomed us with a fine, persistent drizzle that November afternoon in 1962. I remember the gray of the sky mixing with the gray of the buildings much taller than any construction in Bakersfield. The California metropolis seemed like a giant compared to the city we left behind, noisy, busy, full of lights, cars, and hurried strangers. My mother's cousin, Eleanor, was waiting for us at the bus station. She was a woman in her 40s, dark hair tied in a severe bun, thin lips, and a look that mixed compassion and a certain dose of, "I told you so." Later I discovered that she had never approved of my mother's marriage to my father, thought he wasn't reliable, her words. "Irene, my God, you look like a ghost," were her first words upon seeing my mother getting off the bus, still visibly debilitated from the surgery, her face marked by an unhealthy pallor. Then her eyes rested on me, the skinny 9-year-old girl with deep eye bags and a look much older than her age. "And this must be Susie. The last time I saw you, you were a baby in arms." Eleanor's apartment was in the Echo Park neighborhood, in an old 3-story building without an elevator. It was small, a living room that also served as a bedroom for her, a small back room where my mother and I would stay, a cramped kitchen, and a bathroom we had to share. But it was clean, organized, and mainly safe. No ghosts awaited us there, no painful memories lurked in the corners. Eleanor worked as a secretary in a law office downtown and had lived alone since her husband's death, 5 years before. They hadn't had children, something she said she didn't regret. "Men only bring problems, and children give too much work," was her motto, although her actions were much kinder than her words. In the first days in Los Angeles, my mother practically didn't leave the bed. The physical recovery from the surgery, added to the emotional trauma of losing the baby and the violence suffered, had drained all her strength. I spent hours sitting beside her, telling stories I invented, describing what I saw through the apartment window, trying somehow to fill the heavy silence that had settled between us. Eleanor took on all the practical care. She bought food, prepared meals, even helped me with my bath and teeth brushing. At night, when she thought I was sleeping, I heard her talking in a low voice with my mother, trying to cheer her up. "You need to react, Irene. For the girl, if not for yourself." "I know, Eleanor. I just need a few more days." The doctor said you can already start doing light activities. Maybe a walk in the park? Fresh air would do both of you good. 2 weeks after our arrival, my mother finally began to leave the room for longer periods. She spent hours sitting on the small balcony of the apartment, looking at the movement of the street below, her eyes lost in thoughts she didn't share with anyone. Other times, she leafed through the newspapers Eleanor brought from work, looking for job ads, making small notes in a little notebook. "I need to find work soon," she would say. "We can't abuse Eleanor's hospitality forever." "But you're still recovering, Mom." "Life doesn't wait for us to fully recover, my flower. We have to move forward even with the wound still open." The school issue also arose. We were at the end of the school year, only a few weeks left before summer vacation. It didn't make sense to enroll me in a new school for such a short time. It was decided that I would finish the year at home, with Eleanor and my mother helping me with lessons, and I would start at a nearby school in March of the following year. This decision left me both relieved and apprehensive. Relieved because the idea of facing a new school with unknown children terrified me. Apprehensive because it meant spending even more time confined to the small apartment, with few distractions besides the books Eleanor sometimes brought from the public library. It was because of these books, ironically, that I had my first emotional breakdown since the incident. Eleanor had brought a stack of children's stories, thinking they would help me pass the time. Among them was one about a girl who got a little brother and learned to be a good big sister. Exactly the kind of story I would have loved months before. When I saw the cover, with the illustration of a girl holding a baby in her arms, something broke inside me. I started to cry, first silently, then in uncontrollable sobs that shook my whole body. Eleanor, alarmed, tried to calm me down, but I was beyond any consolation. It was as if all the pain I had suppressed in the last few weeks, for trying to be strong for my mother, for trying not to cause more problems, finally found an outlet. My mother, hearing my crying, left the room and found me on the living room floor, hugging the book, sobbing desperately. Without saying anything, she sat down beside me and hugged me. She didn't try to make me stop crying, didn't offer empty words of consolation. She just stayed there, holding me, while the emotional storm passed. When I could finally speak, the words came out broken between sobs. "It's my fault." "What is your fault, my flower?" "The baby. I prayed so much for a little brother. If I hadn't asked so much, Susie. Look at me." My mother held my face between her hands, forcing me to face her. Her eyes, previously opaque with sadness, now shone with an intensity I hadn't seen since before the incident. "None of this is your fault. Do you understand? None. It was your father who did that, not you, never you. But if I hadn't wished so much for a brother, wishing for a brother is a beautiful, natural thing. All children wish for siblings at some point. The problem wasn't your wish, it was your father's reaction to something that should have been a cause for joy." That conversation was the first step in a long healing process for both of us. It wasn't the last time I cried for the little brother I never knew, nor the last time I felt guilty, but it was the first time we talked openly about our feelings since the tragedy. In the days that followed, my mother seemed to find a new determination. She began actively looking for work, going out every morning dressed in the best she had. A simple but elegant navy blue dress, her hair carefully combed, a touch of lipstick to disguise the paleness. It wasn't easy. She had been a seamstress in Bakersfield, but we didn't have money to buy a new sewing machine. Besides, the big stores in Los Angeles preferred seamstresses with experience in high fashion, something my mother, used to doing repairs and simple clothes for the neighborhood in the interior, didn't possess. December arrived, bringing the humid heat of the California summer and the proximity of Christmas, a time we previously associated with joy. But that year only highlighted everything we had lost. There was no money for presents, no home of our own to decorate, no reasons for celebration. Even so, Eleanor insisted on maintaining some traditions. She bought a small artificial pine tree that she placed in a corner of the living room, decorated it with colored balls she kept from previous years, even prepared bread pudding on Christmas Eve. "Life goes on," she said, when my mother questioned if we should really celebrate. "And this girl deserves a bit of normality after everything she's been through." On Christmas night, after a simple but tasty dinner, Eleanor handed me a package wrapped in colored paper. It's nothing of great value, she hastened to explain. But I thought you'd like it. It was a book. My Sweet Orange Tree, by José Mauro de Vasconcelos. The story of a poor boy who faces difficulties but finds consolation in his friendship with a sweet orange tree. Eleanor couldn't have chosen a better gift. I immersed myself in the reading as if it were a refuge, identifying with Zézé, the protagonist who, like me, knew the bitter taste of loss and early disillusion. January brought a novelty. My mother finally got a job in a fabric store downtown. It wasn't the dream job, but it paid enough for us to rent a small apartment of our own and really begin to rebuild our lives. Our new home was a set of 2 rooms in an old building in the Silver Lake neighborhood. A living room that also served as a bedroom for my mother, a tiny room that became mine, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a bathroom where you could barely turn around. But it was ours, only ours, and that made all the difference. The furniture came from thrift stores and donations. A twin bed for me, a sofa bed for my mother, a small table with 2 mismatched chairs, a 2-burner stove, a refrigerator that made a strange noise but worked. Eleanor gave us plates, cutlery, pots, things she had duplicates of or didn't use anymore. It's not much, my mother said on the first night we slept there, looking around the simple apartment. But it's a beginning. Our beginning. March arrived, and with it my first day at the new school. Silver Lake Elementary was larger than my old school in Bakersfield, with more students, more noise, more of everything. I entered the 4th grade classroom with my heart in my throat, feeling the curious looks of the other students evaluating me. The new girl, with clothes too simple, the frightened look of a cornered animal. The teacher, Mrs. Helen, introduced me to the class kindly. This is Susie, who came from Bakersfield to live with us in Los Angeles. I hope you all make her feel welcome. The first weeks were difficult. I was naturally shy, and the recent experiences had made me even more withdrawn. I sat at the back of the room, spoke only when directly asked, spent recess alone, reading my beloved My Sweet Orange Tree, which I had already memorized from so many rereadings. It was Mrs. Helen who noticed my isolation and took the initiative to help me integrate. Noticing that I had facility with composition, writing stories was my escape, my way of processing everything that had happened. She asked me to help other students who had difficulty with the subject. You have a gift with words, Susie, she told me. And sharing our gifts is a way to make friends. Slowly, I began to come out of my shell, first by helping Martha, a girl with blonde braids who had difficulty writing compositions. Then Paul, a freckled boy who liked baseball and reminded me a little of my father in the good times. I quickly pushed that thought away. Gradually, I stopped being the new girl to become Susie, who tells cool stories and helps with the essays. At home, things were also gradually improving. The job at the fabric store wasn't ideal, but it allowed my mother to use her knowledge about sewing to advise customers, and occasionally the owner allowed her to do small sewing jobs in her spare time, which generated extra income. On Sundays, our only completely free day, we explored the city. We got to know Echo Park with its lakes and monuments, Grand Central Market with its colorful stalls of fruits and vegetables, the port where we would stay observing the boats and dreaming of trips we knew we would never take. It was during one of these Sunday outings, almost a year after our arrival in Los Angeles, that my mother received the news that would again change the course of our lives. We were returning home when we met Eleanor, who was coming to visit us. I received a letter from Sergeant Oliver, she said, after the initial greetings. He has been trying to contact you, but since you changed address, my heart accelerated. Sergeant Oliver represented a connection to that terrible night, to Bakersfield, to everything we had tried to leave behind. What did he want? Asked my mother, her voice tense. Anthony's trial has concluded. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder and for what happened to the baby. My mother closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the information. When she opened them again, there was a mixture of relief and sadness in them. 12 years, she murmured. It doesn't bring our son back, but at least he won't be able to harm anyone else for a good while. There's one more thing, continued Eleanor, hesitant. As part of the sentence, all his assets were confiscated to pay compensation to the victims. This includes the house in Bakersfield, The judge determined that the house be sold and the money given to you, Irene, as Susie's legal representative, who was also considered a victim. The news fell like a bomb. Our blue house in Bakersfield, that place that had been the stage for so much happiness and then so much horror, would be sold. The money, not a fortune certainly, but enough to make a difference, would come to us. "What are we going to do with this money, Mom?" I asked that night, while she prepared a simple soup for dinner. She stopped stirring the pot, thoughtful. "First, we're going to save a part for your studies, Susie. I want you to have opportunities that I didn't have. Then," she hesitated, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips, "I've always dreamed of having my own sewing atelier. Maybe it's time to transform that dream into reality." The money from the sale of the house arrived 3 months later. It wasn't a fortune, as we expected, but it was enough for a new beginning. My mother, true to her word, deposited part in a savings account in my name, "for college," she said, although at that time the idea of attending a university seemed as distant as traveling to the moon. With the rest, she rented a small commercial space near home and opened Irene's atelier, specializing in made-to-measure clothes and fine repairs. She bought a used industrial sewing machine, but in good condition, quality fabrics, various trimmings. She had simple business cards made that she distributed in neighborhood stores. The first months were difficult, with few customers and many expenses. But my mother, who had learned in the hardest way to be strong, didn't give up. She worked until late, accepted any job, no matter how small, was careful with every detail as if she were sewing for the First Lady. Gradually, word of mouth began to work. A satisfied customer would recommend to a friend, who would recommend to another. Ladies from the neighborhood began to frequent the atelier, not just for sewing, but to talk, have a little coffee, exchange recipes, and gossip. Irene's atelier became a small feminine meeting point. I helped after school and on weekends. I learned to sew buttons, to do hems, to iron clothes just right. More than practical skills, I learned about perseverance, about rebuilding life after tragedy, about finding beauty in discarded scraps. The years passed. 1964, 1965, 1966. America changed around us, the civil rights movement, the protests, the turmoil. But in our small world, we were slowly building a new normality. It wasn't the life we had dreamed of in Bakersfield, but it was a life that, gradually, began to have moments of joy again. I turned 15 in 1968, now a teenager with typical dreams and concerns for that age. The traumatized girl from Bakersfield had given way to a young woman who, although carrying invisible scars, had learned to smile again, to make plans, to believe in the future. The atelier was modestly thriving. We weren't rich, we never would be, but we had enough to live with dignity. We moved to a larger apartment, still in Silver Lake, but with 2 real bedrooms, a separate living room, a kitchen where more than one person could move at the same time. My mother, who for years had dedicated herself exclusively to work and to me, began timidly to open up to other possibilities. She accepted a client's invitation to a charity tea, went to a movie with friends from the atelier, even allowed the neighbor from 302 to introduce her to her widowed brother who had come from the interior. "I'm not looking for a new husband," she assured me, noticing my concerned look when she was getting ready for this meeting. "But I can't spend the rest of my life afraid, Susie. At some point, we have to risk again." Charles, the neighbor's brother, was a quiet middle-aged man, a retired math teacher who now gave private lessons. He didn't look anything like my father, neither physically nor in temperament. Where my father was impulsive and passionate, Charles was calm and reflective. Where my father was expansive and loud, Charles was contained and silent. He began to frequent our house on Sundays for lunch. He always brought a dessert, a book he thought I might like, a simple flower for my mother. He never tried to assume the role of father to me, never pressed for more than my mother was willing to give. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he became part of our lives. He helped me with math lessons, a subject in which I always had difficulty. He fixed small things in the apartment, a leaking faucet, a loose shelf, the blind that stuck. He took us for car rides on Sundays, showing parts of Los Angeles we had never visited. In 1970, when I was 17 years old, and in my senior year of high school, my mother called me for a serious conversation. Charles asked me to marry him, Susie. I wasn't surprised. I had seen their relationship evolve over the past 2 years, had noticed the sparkle that had returned to my mother's eyes, the lightness that now permeated her movements. And what did you answer? I said I needed to talk to you first, that any decision of this type would affect both of us. I felt a lump in my throat, moved by her consideration. Do you love him, Mom? She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face in a way I hadn't seen since before the tragedy. I do. Not in the intense and overwhelming way I loved your father at the beginning. It's a calmer, more mature love. A love that doesn't hurt. Then say yes, I replied, holding her hands. You deserve to be happy, Mom. We both do. The wedding was simple, in the neighborhood church with few guests, some loyal clients from the atelier, the closest neighbors, Charles's family. Eleanor came, of course, now with completely white hair, but the same perceptive look. Even Sergeant Oliver appeared, bringing as a gift a set of tablecloths that his wife had embroidered, especially for the occasion. My mother wore a dress that she had made herself, not white, which seemed inappropriate for a second marriage, but a soft shade of blue that matched her eyes. She was radiant, younger than her 37 years, as if an enormous weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. We moved to Charles's house soon after, a simple but spacious house in the Los Feliz neighborhood, with a small garden where my mother planted geraniums and petunias, like in our old home in Bakersfield. The atelier continued to function, now with an assistant so that my mother could spend more time at home. The following year, contrary to all expectations, including my own, I was accepted to study English literature at UCLA. The money that my mother had saved for my studies, added to a partial scholarship I got for academic merit, made possible what before seemed an impossible dream. On the night we received the news of my acceptance, sitting in the living room of our new house, Charles opened a bottle of wine, a rare thing at our table, to celebrate. A toast to our college student, he said, raising his glass. The first in the family. My mother, her eyes shining with contained tears, also raised her glass. To Susie, who transformed pain into strength and never gave up. At that moment, looking at those two people who had become my reconstructed family, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense that I could barely breathe. We had been through so much, we had lost so much, but somehow, against all odds, we had found a path to happiness. And if sometimes, in the quietest moments of the night, I still thought about the little brother I never knew, if I still felt that pang of pain for what could have been and never was, I also felt a growing certainty. He hadn't died in vain. His brief existence had led us to this new life, to this second chance, to this possibility of healing and redemption. As my mother always said, some wounds never completely close. But we learn to live with them, to incorporate them into our story, to transform them from a source of pain into a source of strength and understanding. The girl who ran barefoot through the streets of Bakersfield on that terrible night in November 1962 could never have imagined the woman she would become, the challenges she would overcome, the life she would build from the ashes of tragedy. But that's how we grow, isn't it? One painful step at a time, one difficult day after another, until we look back and realize how far we've come. And the journey, my dears, was just beginning. College life opened an entire world that I didn't even know existed. In 1971, at 18 years old, I walked through the corridors of UCLA's English department, feeling simultaneously tiny and giant. Tiny in the face of the grandeur of knowledge that awaited me, giant for having made it there, against all odds. The college years were intense, transformative. I discovered poets who spoke directly to my soul: Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, Langston Hughes. I immersed myself in novels that transported me to other realities, other times, other lives. I learned to analyze texts, to see the layers of meaning behind simple words, to value the power of language as a tool for human expression and connection. I made friends too. For the first time since the tragedy in Bakersfield, I allowed people my age to truly get close. Jennifer, a young woman with lively eyes and an easy laugh, who dreamed of being a teacher in rural schools. Thomas, son of Italian immigrants, passionate about English literature and always carrying a worn guitar. Elisa, serious and determined, first in her family to enter university, just like me. We formed an inseparable quartet. We studied together in the library until late, discussed politics and literature at cheap bar tables, dreamed aloud about the future while walking through the parks of Los Angeles. It was as if, finally, I had permission to be young, to live the common experiences of this age that for so long had been denied to me by the weight of early responsibilities and traumas. America in the 70s wasn't an easy place for college students. The Vietnam War divided the nation, protests intensified, friends disappeared from one day to the next. We lived in a delicate balance between the youth that pulsed in our veins and the constant fear that hung in the air. Be careful what you say in public, my mother always warned me when I went out to meet my friends. Remember that words can be dangerous in these times. Charles, my stepfather, more knowledgeable about the university environment, was even more emphatic. Don't get involved in protests, Susie. It's not worth risking your future for a moment of rebellion. I tried to follow their advice, staying focused on my studies, avoiding the most inflamed student assemblies, the more radical groups. But it was impossible to be completely indifferent to what was happening around us. When Mark, a colleague from the history course, was arrested during a peaceful demonstration and returned 2 weeks later with purple marks under his nails and a look that had seen hell, something changed inside me. I didn't become a revolutionary. The fear was too great, the memory of violence still too vivid in my mind. But I began to understand that there were different forms of resistance. Mine would be through words, education, preservation of memory, and truth. It was with this conviction that I chose my thesis topic, Literature as Testimony and Resistance, Narratives of Loss and Overcoming in Contemporary American Literature. My advisor, Professor Lydia, a severe but fair woman, raised her eyebrows when I presented my proposal. "It's quite a personal topic, isn't it, Susie?" she commented, looking at me over her reading glasses. "All topics are personal, Professor," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. "The difference is that some of us admit it, and others pretend an objectivity that doesn't exist." She smiled, a rare smile that completely transformed her austere face. "Well observed. Let's proceed then." During the development of that work, I revisited many of my own experiences, now with the more mature perspective of a 22-year-old, almost graduated, with intellectual tools to analyze what before I could only feel. It was painful, but also liberating, like draining an abscess that finally finds an outlet. I graduated in December 1974 in a simple but moving ceremony. My mother cried when I put on the cap. Charles took so many photos that he ran out of film in the camera. Even Eleanor was there, now a lady of almost 70, wearing her best outfit and an old-fashioned hat that made everyone smile discreetly. "And now, what's next?" asked my mother during the celebration lunch at home, after the ceremony. "I'm going to teach," I replied, sure of my vocation. "I already have an interview scheduled at Hollywood High School for the beginning of the school year." Hollywood High, as it was affectionately called, was one of the most traditional schools in Los Angeles. Getting a position as a teacher there, freshly graduated, was almost a miracle. I owe this to Professor Lydia, who recommended my name to the principal, impressed with my thesis. I began teaching in March 1975, facing high school classes of teenagers who many times were only 5 or 6 years younger than me. It was scary at first, their young faces staring at me with expectation, curiosity, or, in some cases, complete disinterest. What could I, at 22 years old and with no real experience, teach them? A lot, I discovered. Not just about grammar, literature, and composition, the official curriculum, but about life, about overcoming, about finding beauty even in the most unlikely places. Without going into details about my personal history, I managed to bring to the classes an authenticity that captivated even the most disinterested students. Literature isn't just about old books and dead poets, I would tell them. It's about understanding the human experience, finding words for that which seems unspeakable, connecting with people who lived centuries before us and felt exactly what we feel now. It was in one of these classes that I met Richard. Not as a student, he was the new history teacher, recently arrived from New York. Tall, broad-shouldered, black hair always a little too long for the standards of the time, and intense brown eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. We met for the first time in the teacher's lounge. I was grading tests, absently chewing on the cap of my pen, when he entered, carrying a pile of books that seemed about to collapse. "Can someone help me before I cause a literary disaster?" he asked, laughing at his own predicament. I got up and took half of the books, lightening his load. Our eyes met and, well, it would be very cliché to say it was love at first sight. It wasn't. It was curiosity, interest, a sense of recognition that I couldn't explain. "Susie Anderson, English and literature teacher," I introduced myself after depositing the books on the table. "Richard Sullivan, the new sacrifice to the altar of history," he replied, extending his hand with a smile that illuminated his whole face. "Pleasure to meet you, colleague." Our friendship began like that, between stacked books and jokes about the educational system. We discovered common interests: national cinema, folk music, walks in Griffith Park on Sundays. He had come from New York escaping a complicated divorce, looking for a new beginning, just as I had come from Bakersfield years before. A few months later, he invited me to watch a movie at the Egyptian Theater. He didn't call it a date, nor did I think of it as such. We were just two friends sharing a Saturday afternoon. After the movie, we walked to a cafe in the historic center and talked for hours about the film, about books, about our lives. It was in this conversation that, for the first time, I shared my complete story with someone outside my family. I don't know what led me to open up in this way. Perhaps the way he listened, intensely present, without judgments. Perhaps the sense of security that his presence transmitted to me. Or perhaps it was simply the right moment, after years of gradual healing. I told him about my father, about my mother's pregnancy, about the terrible night when I lost my little brother before even meeting him. I told him about our escape to Los Angeles, about the slow and painful reconstruction of our lives, about how literature had been my refuge and eventually my vocation. When I finished, it was already night. The lights of the cafe created an intimate, almost confessional environment. Richard remained silent for a moment, absorbing everything he had heard. Then, without saying a word, he took my hand on the table and gently squeezed it. There was no pity in his eyes, only deep understanding and something else that I couldn't immediately identify. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he finally said. "It's an honor to know someone as strong as you, Susie." Strong. Nobody had ever called me that before. Brave, yes. Studious, certainly. But strong? It was a word I had never associated with myself. However, coming from him, it sounded true. Our relationship evolved naturally from there. More encounters at the cinema, longer walks in the park, simple dinners at restaurants downtown. Our first kiss happened on a rainy night in August, when he accompanied me to my house and we stopped under the marquee of a closed store to wait for the rain to diminish. It was gentle, hesitant, as if we were both testing unknown waters. I introduced Richard to my mother and Charles on a Sunday lunch. I was nervous. Since that night in Bakersfield, my mother had become extremely protective, suspicious of any man who approached me. But Richard, with his disarming honesty and his genuine respect, quickly won her over. "He looks at you as if he were seeing the sun rise for the first time," my mother commented after he left. "And that, my daughter, is much more valuable than any declaration of love." Our relationship continued strong over the following months. Richard respected my space, my silences, my occasional retreats when difficult memories were involuntarily triggered. He never pressured, never demanded, just waited patiently for me to find my own way back to him. In 1977, 2 years after we met, he asked me to marry him. It wasn't anything spectacular. We were sitting on the usual bench in Griffith Park, observing the view of the city, when he took a small box from his pocket. "You don't need to answer now," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring with a single blue stone. "I know that marriage can be a complicated subject for you, given your family history, but I want you to know that I'm here, that I love you, and that I want to build a life by your side, however it may be, at the pace you need." I looked at the ring, at the man who held it, at the future it represented. A future that, for many years, I didn't even dare to imagine for myself. "Yes," I replied, surprising us both with the speed of my response. "Yes, I want to marry you." We married on a sunny afternoon in October 1977, in a small ceremony in the garden of my mother and Charles's house. Only close family and some intimate friends. I wore a light blue dress that my mother made especially for the occasion, with small daisies embroidered on the hem. A subtle tribute to the little brother I never knew, but whose absence somehow shaped the path that led me there. We began our married life in a rented apartment in the Silver Lake neighborhood, not far from the school where we taught. We didn't have much, 2 teachers' salaries didn't allow for luxuries, but we had enough. A bookshelf full of books, a record player to listen to the Bob Dylan and Joan Baez records we so loved, a large table where we graded tests side by side on weeknights. In 1979, I was invited to teach at UCLA as well, in the evening English program. I immediately accepted, excited by the prospect of working with college students, of being able to deepen discussions that the high school curriculum didn't allow. It meant longer days, more work, less free time, but the satisfaction compensated for the fatigue. Richard supported me unconditionally, taking on more household tasks to balance my increased workload. "You would do the same for me," he would say when I thanked him. And I would, without thinking twice. It was during this time that we began to talk about children. It was a delicate subject for me, loaded with fears and insecurities. What if I didn't know how to be a mother? What if I unintentionally repeated family patterns that had hurt me so much? What if I lost the baby, as my mother had lost my brother? Richard patiently listened to all my concerns, without ever devaluing or minimizing them. "We'll be imperfect parents, as all are," he would say. "But we'll be loving, present, conscious parents, and that makes all the difference." We decided to try. And at the end of 1980, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a confused mixture of joy and terror. I told my mother first, with a trembling voice over the phone. "Mom, I'm pregnant, 2 months along." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but seemed like an eternity. Then, I heard a contained sob. "My daughter! What wonderful news! You're going to be an amazing mother." "How can you be so sure?" I asked, tears now flowing freely. "I'm so afraid, because I know you, Susie. I know your heart. And I know that the love you have to give is greater than any fear." The pregnancy proceeded without complications, but was an emotional roller coaster. Each visit to the doctor, each exam, each small discomfort brought up memories and anxieties. Richard was by my side at every step, holding my hand during consultations, reading books about fetal development and natural childbirth, painting the baby's room in a soft shade of green that would work for either a boy or a girl. On August 15th, 1981, after 14 hours of labor, our son was born. A healthy, rosy boy, with a dark fuzz covering his little head and a pair of impressively powerful lungs. When they placed him in my arms for the first time, I felt a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. It was as if every cell in my body recognized this small being, as if we had always been together and were only momentarily separated. "What shall we call him?" asked Richard, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, looking in wonder at our son. We had discussed several names during the pregnancy, but none seemed adequate now that we were looking at the real face of our son. Suddenly, I knew exactly what it should be. "Daniel," I replied, remembering the list of names I had made with my mother on that distant night in Bakersfield, when we dreamed of my little brother, who never got to be born. "Let's call him Daniel." Richard, who knew my story, immediately understood the importance of that name. He nodded, his eyes shining with contained tears. "Daniel. It's perfect." Motherhood transformed me in ways I could never have anticipated. The love for Daniel was different from anything I had ever experienced. Primitive, visceral, unconditional. The fears didn't completely disappear, but were gradually replaced by a fierce determination to be the mother he deserved, to create a safe, loving, and stable family environment. I returned to teaching when Daniel was 6 months old, on a part-time basis. My mother, now a doting grandmother of 48 years, insisted on taking care of him during my working hours. "No daycare," she declared. "My grandson deserves individual attention." Seeing my mother with Daniel was one of the greatest joys of my life. She, who had lost a child in such a traumatic way, now overflowed with love for this little grandson who, in a way, represented a second chance, a healing for both of us. The years passed in a succession of firsts. Daniel's first smile, his first tooth, his first steps, his first word, which was book, to the pride of his teacher parents. Each milestone was celebrated, photographed, carefully recorded in an album that grew as rapidly as he did. In 1984, our family increased again with the birth of Louise, a girl with curious eyes and a determined temperament from the first day. Daniel, now 3 years old, assumed with comic seriousness his role as protective older brother. "I'm going to teach her everything, Mom," he declared, looking at the baby in the crib. "Like you would have taught your little brother if he had been born." I was speechless, surprised that he remembered that part of my story that I had shared only once, in a simplified form. Children have an incredible capacity to absorb and process emotional information, even when we think they're not paying attention. Our family life settled into a comfortable routine. Richard and I continued teaching, now both with stable positions. Me at UCLA and Hollywood High, he as a tenured teacher in the public school system. We bought a small house in the Silver Lake neighborhood, with a yard where the children could play and an office where we prepared our classes and graded papers. Weekends were sacred for family activities, picnics in the park, visits to the grandparents, boat rides on Echo Park Lake when weather permitted. During school vacations, we would take small trips to the beaches of Santa Monica, to the mountains, once even to San Francisco, an epic adventure that required months of saving. My mother and Charles were constant presences in our lives. Sunday dinners at their house were an inviolable tradition. Charles, now a gentleman with completely white hair but still a sharp mind, taught chess to Daniel and told amazing stories that made Louise laugh until she was breathless. In 1987, I received the invitation that would again change the course of my career, a position as an assistant professor in the English department at UCLA, my alma mater. The salary was better, the working conditions superior, but it would mean leaving Hollywood High, where I had taught for more than a decade. "Accept it," said Richard without hesitation when I shared the news. "It's a unique opportunity. Your students at Hollywood High will miss you, but think of all the future teachers you'll be able to influence at the university." I accepted, and thus began a new professional chapter. I gave classes to undergraduates, advised senior theses, participated in examination boards. In 1990, encouraged by colleagues and by Richard, I entered the master's program in American literature, now as a student, not just a teacher. Balancing work, studies, and family wasn't easy. There were nights when I slept only 4 hours, weekends sacrificed for writing the dissertation, moments when I questioned if I was being fair to my children, if I wasn't asking too much of Richard. "We're fine, Mom," Daniel assured me one night, when I found him still awake long after bedtime. He was 10 years old then, a sensitive and perceptive child. "Louise and I understand that this is important for you, and we're proud." I completed the master's in 1992 with a thesis on narratives of trauma and resistance in American women's literature. It was a natural extension of the work I had begun as an undergraduate, now enriched by years of teaching experience and by my own journey as a woman, wife, and mother. The 90s brought significant changes. Daniel entered adolescence, bringing with him all the challenges of this turbulent phase. Louise, always independent, began to develop a surprising talent for mathematics and sciences, to the astonishment of parents connected to the humanities. Richard received an invitation to coordinate the history area at the university's lab school, a deserved recognition of his dedication to education. And I, following the natural flow of the academic career, began my PhD in 1995. My dissertation, more ambitious than the thesis, explored memory, trauma, and healing in 20th century American autobiographical narrative. It was, in many ways, an attempt to understand my own story through a broader prism, to find patterns and meanings in experiences that, in isolation, seemed only painful and without purpose. In 1998, at 45 years old, I defended my dissertation and received the title of Doctor of Philosophy in English. The committee was unanimous in its praise, highlighting the depth of the analysis and the sensitivity with which I approached such delicate themes. In the audience, my entire family watched me with pride. Richard, my companion of more than 2 decades. Daniel, now a young man of 17 about to apply for college. Louise, with her 14 years and an intelligence that intimidated teachers. My mother and Charles, both now elderly, but with eyes shining with emotion. It was a significant achievement, but the true triumph was there, in that audience. In the family we had built, in the bonds we had forged, in the love that had grown through and despite the scars of the past. The following years brought the kind of joys and challenges that are part of any family life. Daniel entered law school, determined to work with human rights, a choice that didn't surprise me considering the stories he had heard growing up. Louise, contrary to all expectations, decided to study physics, fascinated by the workings of the universe at its most fundamental scales. Richard and I continued teaching, now both at the university. We bought a larger house, closer to campus, with enough rooms for when the children would visit after they inevitably left home. We traveled more, now that we had more resources and fewer daily responsibilities with small children. In 2005, at 52 years old, I published my first book, not a novel, as many expected, but an academic study titled Words as Bridges, Narratives of Trauma and Healing in American Literature. The launch at Barnes & Noble on the West Side gathered colleagues, former students, friends, and of course, my family. It was at this event that Daniel, now a 24-year-old lawyer, introduced me to the young woman who would become his wife, Camilla, a young woman with a gentle smile and intelligent eyes who was studying psychology. "She read your book before she even met me, Mom," he told me, proud. It was one of the reasons why she agreed to go out with me when we met. 2 years later, in 2007, Louise also found her match. Peter, an engineer who worked with renewable energy and shared her passion for sustainability and technological innovation. "He understands my jokes about quantum physics, Mom," she explained, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. Daniel and Camilla's wedding took place in 2008, an outdoor ceremony in the gardens of a hotel in Santa Monica. When I saw him waiting at the altar, so handsome in his dark suit, so clearly happy and sure of his choice, I couldn't help but think of the long road that brought us there, of the frightened girl I once was, running barefoot through the streets of Bakersfield, of the determined young woman who rebuilt her life in Los Angeles, of the woman who found love, purpose, and finally, peace. Louise and Peter got married the following year, opting for a more intimate but equally moving ceremony. "No frills," declared my daughter, always practical. "Just the people who really matter and good food." And so it was, a small, elegant wedding perfectly aligned with the couple's personality. In 2010, at 57 years old, I received the news that would bring a new dimension of joy to my life. I would be a grandmother. Daniel and Camilla were expecting their first child, due to be born in July. The pregnancy proceeded without complications, but I couldn't avoid the anxiety that accompanied me throughout the period, a distant echo of old fears, past losses. Mariana was born on a sunny winter morning, as healthy and perfect as her parents had been. When I held her for the first time, I felt an immediate connection, a love that seemed both familiar and completely new. It was as if the circle finally closed, as if a very old wound finally completely healed. "She has your eyes, Mom," observed Daniel, sitting beside me while I cradled my newborn granddaughter, "and the same stubborn little chin." The following year, it was Louise and Peter's turn to announce they were expecting. "It's going to be a boy," declared Louise with the confidence of someone who had studied theoretical physics. I did the calculations, and she was right. Michael was born in February 2012, a robust baby with his father's calm temperament and his mother's insatiable curiosity. Life as a grandmother brought a joy I hadn't expected, a deep satisfaction in seeing my children become loving and competent parents, in witnessing the continuity of the family we had built with so much effort and love. Richard, now with gray hair but the same smile that had won me over decades before, seemed to rejuvenate in the presence of the grandchildren. In 2015, I retired from the university after 28 years of teaching. The farewell was emotional. Former students came from far away for the ceremony. Colleagues organized a book with articles in my honor. The dean handed me a plaque in recognition of services rendered to the institution. But the real celebration happened at home, with my family gathered around the large table on the porch. My mother, now an 82-year-old lady with snow-white hair, but still an indomitable spirit, proposed a toast. "To my daughter," she said, raising her glass with slightly trembling hands, "who transformed pain into beauty, loss into creation, fear into courage, who built a life that honors not only herself, but all who love her." I looked around the table, at Richard, my companion of more than 4 decades, at Daniel and Louise, the children we raised with so much love, at Camilla and Peter, who had truly become part of the family, at Mariana and Michael, in whom I saw the future unfolding, at my mother and Charles, witnesses of the long journey from Bakersfield. And I thought, not for the first time, of the little brother I never knew, of how his brief existence, his tragic loss, had somehow shaped the entire path that brought me to that moment, to that table full of love and life. Not that his loss had been necessary or justifiable, it never would be. But in the mysterious alchemy of time and human resilience, even the greatest tragedies can be, if not redeemed, at least incorporated into a larger narrative of healing and meaning. Now, at 72 years old, sitting in this rocking chair as I tell this story to you, I look back and see not only the pain, the loss, the fear that marked my early years. I see also the strength I discovered within myself, the love I found and built, the lives I touched as a teacher, the words I left as a legacy in my writings, the family I created and that continues to grow. My dears who have accompanied me to this point, thank you so much for listening to this grandma share her journey, so difficult, so painful, but also so full of hope and redemption. If my story touched your heart in any way, please leave that loving like that shows me I'm not alone in these memories. Subscribe to the channel to not miss our next conversations. I still have so many stories to share with you. And if there's one thing I've learned in all these years, it's that our stories have power. Power to heal, power to connect, power to show that no one is alone in their pain or in their struggle. And when we share these stories, when we allow our scars to become bridges instead of walls, we create a world a little better, a little more compassionate, a little more human. Until our next conversation, my dears, may God bless each of your paths, and may you find, as I found, flowers growing even in the hardest concrete of life.